Earlier today, I posted a video and I mentioned something that someone had mentioned to me, that they had said that there was some sort of legislation going into effect to mandate Sunday worship. Okay, so I had asked the person for some clarification on that, and after doing a little research, I realized that nothing's going into effect to mandate Sunday worship. What is happening is there was a Supreme Court case with a former Mennonite missionary who was a USPS worker. And previously, USPS did not require their workers to work on Sunday. Counterfeit Sabbath, right? They were not previously required to work on Sunday. But when USPS signed this contract with Amazon and started to deliver Amazon packages, they began requiring their employees to work on Sunday. Well, this person took a stand on it and said, I'm not going to be working on Sunday or any of God's holidays. And I don't know what they mean about that, if they're talking about Easter and Christmas, because if they think Sunday is Sabbath, then they probably are talking about Easter and Christmas. In any event, that's what the court ruling is about. It is very likely seems to be opening the door to more conversations and potential legislation in the future. But we don't know what that's going to turn into. We have no idea what that's going to turn into. We do know 100% that counterfeit Christianity is going to rise in power as the Antichrist. So we know that, but let's not add our story to it. So we need to be careful about that. I did go and research the person who she had heard this from, calls himself a pastor, has 7.8 thousand subscribers. That should be a red flag to you. And I listened to very little of the video, just enough to glean that he thinks the mark of the beast has something to do with global currency, just like every other false pastor on the planet. It doesn't say that in the Bible. It says you won't be able to buy or sell. And we know that you are not defiled by something that goes into your body. So if anyone puts a chip in you or a tattoo, you're not defiled by that. You're defiled by what's going on in your heart. Mark of the beast is not going to be something that is physically visible. It is something that is in your heart and coming out of your right hand, your forehead, and your mouth. Your deeds, your thoughts, how you speak. Same thing with the seal of God. But no one's questioning that and thinking that it's some sort of a computer chip or a tattoo. And so because of this false doctrine that he is perpetuating, he's now focused on global currency. We've had digital currency for a long time now. And maybe what God's doing is saying, look alive through it and through the jab. Maybe he's trying to wake up the sleepers. And maybe also he is sending deception to those who make up their own doctrines, those who do not love truth. Be careful about who you're listening to, guys, because all it takes is a little bit of leaven to rise the whole lump. It will completely toxify the way that you see things that are happening in the world, the way that you see God's word, the way you understand what you're reading. You need to understand the word and from God's spirit. The word will interpret itself. The word does not need false pastors to drum up a story. The other thing that he's saying is he was focused on Israel news. What's going on in the land of Israel? Who's Israel, guys? Who's the third temple? We're the third temple. We're Israel. We're Jerusalem. We're Zion. Enough of this, looking at what's happening in the land of Israel. Enough of it. That's a lie. If you look with your carnality, you are going to be deceived. The other thing that I heard him say is we need God in this country. So he didn't disagree with the legislation that was going into effect, or that could potentially go into effect that's being argued in order to accommodate religious observers. And he said we need God in this country, and that is the same attitude and language that's being used in order to rise the Antichrist. Because it sounds sweet, so you need to be careful about what you're hearing and understanding and discerning. This is not sweet. God does not force you to accept him, and he doesn't force you by man-made legislation to observe his Sabbaths. He says this is going to be a sign between you and I, between you and me. And the reason he says that is because it's a sign of what's in your heart and whether or not you actually love him. Once you make some sort of legislation that you have to obey this. You just removed the free choice that God himself saw fit to give. And although that's not the aim of what's going on in this court case right now, in this court ruling, this attitude that we need God in this country is being filtered through ungodly agenda. It looks like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon, because the agenda is to mandate and coerce into submission. And you will be mandated and coerced into submission to false gods, false messiahs, false Sabbath. That isn't how God does things. That's not what he told us. What are you going to bring God into this country? How do you do that? 2 Thessalonians 2:7. For the secret power of lawlessness is already at work, but the one who now holds it back, who's the one who now holds it back? That would be God, will continue to do so until he's taken out of the way. How do you take God out of the way? It's when you spurn him. So how do you bring God into the country? You submit to him. You don't start making up your own legislation to impose on everybody else, because everybody else, according to what God established, also has a choice of whether to accept and receive him. That is not the way he rolls. That is the spirit of the Antichrist, who coerces and forces and requires submission. So you're going to hear false teachers like this speak in this way, and if you're not careful, you're going to be carried away with that false doctrine that is actually setting up the Antichrist. Do you understand why I tell you it's so important for you to discern the people you're listening to with God by his Spirit? Because there are too many people, too many self-proclaimed Christians who don't think that they have the responsibility to actually think for themselves and receive from God's Spirit. And they just follow along with whatever these false teachers say. Stop wasting your time focusing on the news in Israel as though Jesus is going to show up over there. Stop wasting your time focusing on global currency and the storing up that these people lead you into, the plans of your own hands, so that you can avoid picking up your cross and suffering the way that you're supposed to suffer, and you can avoid resting and trusting in God to take care of you as he knows is good. Stop listening to liars who say things like we need God in this country, and what they mean is we need to legislate and force people to accept a false God and counterfeit Christianity. There are two very different spirits at work here. And in chapter 6 of Revelation, we know what the agenda of the Antichrist is. He's seen in verse 2. I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, so a weapon, and he was given a crown, so he was given power, one crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on what? Bent on conquest. That is the agenda and spirit of the Antichrist. Revelation 19:11, I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse whose rider is called Faithful and True. Totally different agenda or will. This rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and wages war. Big difference between those two agendas, the agenda of the Antichrist and the will of God. He doesn't force you. He is the one who established the freedom for you to choose. Even with the Israelites, people would be cast out of the camp if they weren't demonstrating certain things, if they weren't demonstrating that they were healing, for example, if they were sinning, if they were engaging in certain behaviors, if they were not being a holy nation set apart, they'd be cast out of the camp. That's not coercion. They had their choice. You want to live as the world, go live with the world then. See what they can do for you. That's not coercion. You've been given a choice. But when you start legislating things, then there's coercion. So to say we need God in this country, how about stop fear-mongering people and actually teach people how to return to God, and then we'll have God in this country. You call yourself a pastor. This is what the word of God says. Return to me and I will return to you. And no one will rule over you. Your enemies will not rule over you. He is the one who sets up kings, and he is the one who deposes kings. Not your voting system. Your voting system does nothing. He's the one who will give the candidates. He is the one who will choose the rulers who will rule over you. But counterfeit Christianity wants to accomplish this by the work of their own hands. They want to stand in the place of God so they don't actually have to return to him and have a relationship with him. Do you see how wicked that is? Please, you guys, please be discerning about what you're listening to online. Watching people who speak in this way leads you into deception. It leads you by the work of your hands. It leads you back into the flesh. It defeats all of the things that God is intending to do in you, to build in you in the spirit and the heart. This person who I looked up, where that information originally came from, is a false teacher. They are a liar for the reasons I have explained. They have a cookie-cut narrative that does not come from the Bible. It comes from man, from many, many generations of man talking about these things, developing their own theories about how this is going to look, to drive people away from God and towards them for their own glory, for their own power, for their own notoriety, and perhaps for their own delusional comfort that they somehow control the story of how this is going to unfold. It's utter wickedness. There are some things that we don't know until we know, that God does not reveal until the season. And so what these people are doing is they have an idea of what the mark of the beast is. Oh, it's digital currency. Oh, it's the chip. And rather than going to the Spirit of God and his word, they go to the news to tell them so that they can substantiate and confirm their own delusional story. It is the reason they have no wisdom, but they have a lot of followers, don't they? 7.8 thousand to be exact. Because what do the masses do? They gather around themselves many teachers to tell them what their itching ears want to hear. They would rather do that than the thing that God told us to do from the Old Testament to the New. Return to me and I will heal you. Return to me and I will bestow this wisdom to you. Please check your own hearts. And for your own sake, clean house on your YouTube channel. Discern the people you're subscribed to by God's Spirit. God bless you.